So, you get me this morning talking about the last in our series on Uncontainable. And I'm really excited about today because this is actually one of my favourite. I know I say this kind of every time I talk, but this is actually one of my favourite stories from the Bible in Acts 12. It's got everything in it. It's got drama, it's got humour, and it's got God breaking through in a powerful way. So, be ready. Be ready. So, but just before I start, I just wanted to say, as I was preparing this talk this week on Thursday, I was kind of getting myself ready, sorted, doing some reading, doing some writing, doing some praying. And I suddenly saw running past my window my rabbits. So in December, the Baker clan gained 2 more family members that are these bunny rabbits. The kids wanted a dog. We said no dog, but we will do bunnies. The bunnies have proved to be more complicated and hard work than any puppy I think we could have had. So the rabbits leaped past the window, and then I proceeded for the next 40 minutes chasing these blinking rabbits around the garden to try and get them back into their cage. And I actually had to give up because I had someone coming. So I just left them. I left them wandering around the garden, and I actually prayed, Jesus, please help them not to escape from the garden. That prayer was not answered. And what happened was I wasn't able to then go and chase these rabbits until much later in the afternoon when my neighbour came round and said, I think your rabbits are on the upper part of the estate. And at that point, it was me, no David, he wasn't there, and I had the 4 kids, and I just cooked tea, and so I was like, I can't go now, Dave, he's called David as well, I can't go now, Dave, they're just going to have to roam a bit. Fed the kids, David came back, we went up to the upper estate, there were 8 neighbours on the roads trying to catch these bunny rabbits. Anyway, eventually, we managed to get these rabbits and put them in their hutch. And as I put them in their hutch, I thought to myself, these really are uncontainable bunnies. And that, my friends, is what the church and the power of God in his church is going to be like, okay? And I'm going to rename those bunnies Paul and Silas, I think. Definitely. They're Nibbles and Nutmeg at the moment, but I think they're due for a name change. Anyhow, that's a little bit of an aside. Let's move on to the Bible. I think that's where we should start. So we're going to read from Acts 12. I have no Bible. Could we put it up on the screen? Thank you. Okay, let's read it. We're going to read it all because it's a great story. So come on. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. And when he saw that this met with approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. And then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals," and Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of prison, but he had no idea what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened by itself, and they went through it. When they'd walked the length of the street, suddenly the angel left him. And then Peter came to himself. "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen." When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked on the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was overjoyed and ran back without opening the door and exclaimed, "Peter is at the door." "You're out of your mind," they told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, "It must be his angel." But Peter kept on knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. "Tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this," he said, and then he left for another place. In the morning, there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had happened, what had become of Peter. After Herod had a thorough search made for him, he didn't find him. He cross-examined the guards and had them executed. So, let's put this into a little bit of context. Okay, so the church in Jerusalem, it's been growing, but it's also been coming against persecution. And so here we have Herod. Herod, in this story, is his father is the one who killed off all the boys when Jesus was a baby, all those boys 2 years and under. His uncle is the one who had John the Baptist beheaded. And here we see Herod following in his family footsteps and trying to demolish the church and God's purposes. And what's happened is James has been beheaded. James and Peter are both leaders of the Jerusalem church. And so Herod, seeing that the Jews really don't like this church and he wants political prowess, so he decides he's going to have James executed, which is what he's just done. And now here we have Peter. When Herod sees how happy that's made all the Jews, he decides to arrest Peter as well. So he gets Peter and he has him arrested with all of these soldiers. Did you hear that? 4 lots of 4 soldiers. There is a huge guard around Peter. In fact, he's chained to these soldiers as he's sleeping. And he is due to go on trial and then most likely to be executed. This is looking bad for the church in Jerusalem. This is not looking good. Both leaders have been taken. So inevitably, it could seem the church is going to shrink, it's going to shrivel, it's going to die, and that's going to be the end of it. But no. And I want us to talk this morning, church, about what do we do when we are in our prisons, whatever they may be. What do we do? How do we respond when we are in our prison place? It might be that we are stuck in a job that we are really struggling with and we are frustrated with. It might be a financial situation that we can't get ourselves out of. It might be a relationship. It might be anxiety or fear or an addiction. What do we do when we are in our prison place and the consequences of where we are seem inevitable? And I want to suggest this morning that when we are in that place, we need to know how we shift our perspective, what position we are going to hold, and we need to know who has the real power. And so let's start with perspective. And the question I'm going to ask now, guys, it's going to be a little bit edgy. How big is your butt? Let me explain. How big is your butt? It's in the Bible, don't worry, okay? It says here, so Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying for him. Where are you putting your butt, church? Because you have the power of the living Christ living in you. Do you know the power of your prayers? James talks about the prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. And sometimes the narrative when we are in our prison place, the narrative in our heads is so loud that we lose the sense of who we are and whose we are. And we don't pray like we could to see the breakthrough. And I want to encourage you, church, to move your butt. To move your butt and start to pray. Because when we pray, things happen. Now, let me just remind you, the context of this situation is that James has just been beheaded. I have no doubt that the church had also been gathered praying for James. And yet, he died. But what do? What do they do when the same thing has happened to Peter, their other leader? What do? They gather and they keep going. in their disappointment, in their pain, in their frustration, when it didn't happen in the way that they wanted it to, they gathered together and they carried on praying. Because when we position ourselves in that place of prayer, we position ourselves to encounter him and his purposes and his power and his perspective and his will for our lives, for the lives of those around us, and for the lives of his church and the nation and this world. And I want to encourage us today to know the power of who we are and whose we are, and to move our butts. Okay, I've got a couple of quotes on prayer. I'm so sorry for my slides team, because honestly, I jump about so much, it's not easy. Can you see the bits? Yeah, here we go. Okay, John Wesley, he says, God does nothing without prayer and everything with it. Next one. It is possible to move men through God by prayer alone. That's Hudson Taylor. And then William Gurnall said, Satan cannot deny that great wonders have been wrought by prayer. As the spirit of prayer goes up, so God's kingdom comes down. Do we believe it, church? Do we believe it? Yes. The word says we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but we are those who step out in faith. I can't remember the full verse. Dad, do you know that bit? My dad's here. He knows the Bible so well. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and are saved. That is who we are, church. That is who we are. So we need to pray. The other point that I wanted to make here is the significance of gathering to pray. This is important. It's really important. We can see throughout history that when the church has gathered to pray, things have shifted. The word says when 2 or 3 gather in his name, there he will be. He responds to our gathered prayer. David and I, a while ago, probably early on in our marriage, just before we went out to Malawi, we set up a group that we call Baker's Base Camp. And basically, these were people who we got around us to pray for us. Now, we have used this prayer group again and again and again throughout our journey. And it has been incredible that in different prison places that we have found ourselves in, when we have sent out, it's now on WhatsApp, when we've sent out a WhatsApp to our prayers, what we have seen shift. One example of this would be when I was pregnant with Ezra, so this was about 4 years ago. When we moved to Cheltenham, we rented the house that we're now living in from the diocese. And that in itself, God did lots in. But anyway, so we rented the house from the diocese. And it got to a point, at that point when I was pregnant with Ezra, when the diocese contacted us and said, we want to sell the house. Now, we did not have the finances to buy the house. They said, we want to sell it, but we're going to offer it to you. If you want to buy it, we'll offer you first refusal. Amazing, but we don't have the money to buy this house in Cheltenham. And so we did own a house in Letchworth, but we couldn't sell it. We were really struggling to sell it. So I felt in this prison place. I was going to have this baby. We had 3 other children. I was like, oh, what are we going to do? So we sent out a prayer on our WhatsApp that something would shift, okay, to our Baker's Base Camp. And then this is David, because he is a man of faith, my husband. And he said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to now open a bottle of champagne and toast to the breakthrough. And it is exactly what we did. I didn't have much because I was pregnant, just sensible. So we toasted to the breakthrough. And within that week, somebody had offered us a bridging loan so that we could buy the house. The price of the house was within the amount that we could afford because of that. And then just after that, with ongoing prayer, we sold our house, paid off the loan, and now we own the house we're living in, which is beyond anything we could have asked or imagined, church, honestly. It was incredible. And we believe that is because the power of prayer to move the hand of God and to position us in the places where he wants us to be is incredible. And it's beyond, he is able to do immeasurably more than all you could ask or imagine. Don't let the narratives of your experience dictate your theology. Don't. Let what he says, who he is, and what he says you are, let that tell you what he could do in your life and through you. Okay. Prayer. The next thing is positioning. What position are you going to take? As I said, the church at this point, they've gathered to pray, but they're not necessarily in a place of faith, are they? They're acting in faith, but they may not feel full of faith and energized that he's going to do this. And we know this. We know this because of the sheer level of surprise when Rhoda, the servant girl, comes to the door and Peter's there. This is what they're praying for. And yet they are completely surprised to the point that she doesn't even open the door and he's stood there knocking. It's amazing. And so, and then when she goes and tells them Peter's at the door, they tell her she's mad. This is what you're praying for. And he's here, God's done it. And I want to suggest, church, that sometimes all we need to do is come to him wherever we're at, whatever we feel. Bring all the stuff, but do what he's asked to do and put our butt in that place. Peter's in prison, but we're going to pray. We haven't got the money, but God is the provider. I'm really afraid of what's going to happen, but I know God is peace. And when we do that faithfully and we come, he will then do the unexpected. He'll do the unexpected. And we'll be ready for it. We'll be ready for it. Now let's look at Peter's position. It says, the night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. An angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. Peter's asleep. I think if I was going to be put on trial and then most likely beheaded, I would not be able to sleep very well. I'm not a great sleeper anyway, if I'm honest. In fact, when we got married, David and we chose an IKEA king-size bed because someone had told us they're really big. Because the thought of sleeping next to anybody made me think, I'm never going to sleep again. It's actually fine. I sleep really well next to David. All is well. But not the greatest sleeper. So if I knew that I was going to be beheaded and was chained to two soldiers, my sleep would not be peaceful. And yet we see Peter here, fast asleep, to the point that when an angel appears in his cell, shines a bright light, he still doesn't wake up. The angel has to strike him on the side to actually wake him up. That is the level of peace that Peter has at this moment. Who does it remind you of? Jesus. Yeah. Yes. Well done, church. Jesus, asleep in the storm. All the disciples think they're going to die. They're like, Jesus, don't you even care the situation we're in now? We are in dire straits and you're asleep in the boat. And Jesus is asleep because he knows who his God is. And he knows who he is. And Peter is asleep because he knows who his God is. He knows who he is. This is not an even match between Herod and God. At the beginning of the story, it feels like Herod has all the power. That's not what Peter thinks. Peter knows that God holds the power and is able to get the breakthrough. And church, we can be in that place of peace when we know who he is and what he can do. And one just little aside of this as well is I just want to very quickly talk about Paul and Silas. Because yes, there's prayer. But also Paul and Silas in their prison place, they also praise, don't they? They are singing in their prison. They're singing in their prison place. They are worshiping, declaring who God is. And in that place, the prison walls fall. Tyler Staton, who is a church leader in the States, he uses this term, which I really like, called defiant adoration. Defiant adoration, that in your prison place, when the walls have still not yet fallen, that you can praise, you can declare the praises of the living God. There is power when we worship. There is power when we worship, and the enemy wants to keep us from that place. Because it is truth that sets us free. And as we declare truth, as we declare who he is, our perspective changes. And something shifts. And the walls begin to shake. And our prisons can shift into places of freedom. And finally, church, power. It's his power. It's uncontainable. It is uncontainable. And I don't know where you are at today. I don't know whether you came into church feeling heavied, feeling wearied. I don't know, even as I'm speaking, whether there are all these things going through your head of the things that you're carrying. But even in this moment, I want to encourage you to lift your eyes to who it is who holds the power. This is our Father in heaven. This is the God who loves you so deeply and immensely, that you are his delight, that he knows you and he knows what you are walking through. And it's not about you having it all together. It says, doesn't it, that his power is sufficient for us, for his power is made perfect in our weakness, that when we are weak, that is when he is strong. In your weakness, he is strong. And so however you've come into church today, whether you feel up here or you feel right down here, he is the same God. He is the same God. And I want to encourage you that he has the power. Revelation 3:7 says, what God shuts, no one can open. And what he opens, no one can shut. When Peter gets to, the doors open, there's chains fall off. And then he walks to the prison door, that opens. And he walks to the city gate, that opens. Because nothing can contain the purposes of God. Nothing can stand against the purposes of the living God. And church, if we want to be a part of his purposes, and if we start to pray, we will position ourselves to see his purposes being fulfilled in this generation. So I want to encourage us to wake up, to take hold of the power of the living God that he's put in us, and to start to pray so that we can see things change and we can see things shift. We all know the culture that we are living in at this moment. The confusion of identity, the confusion of who we are, of who are young people. What is going on? But church, we do not have to be imprisoned by those things. We don't have to be imprisoned by anxiety and fear about what is happening. The enemy would want us to think that the church of God is shrinking, that we have no more voice. But it is a lie. It is a lie. And church, we need to wake up. We need to start praying. And we need to take our ground for the kingdom. Because his kingdom will come and his will be done here on earth as it is in heaven as we pray. And it's interesting that we are moving into this thy kingdom come, this time when the nation and the world are going to come together and pray. And I want to echo, let's do it. Let's join with them and let's pray. Let's shake off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let's run the race marked out for us. Are you ready? Are you ready, church?